the Mexican government in 2008 estimated that the entire cost could be as much as 50% of the volume of trade, or $616 million annually. Now, this is the process for agricultural inspections, but for most goods, there is a fairly similar and arguably equally complicated process that involves inspections by Mexican officials, U.S. federal officials, and then once they cross the border, state officials. So each, you have several different government entities, each inspecting the same produce. Although these inspections may differ somewhat, there is a lot of overlap in these inspections, of course resulting in what could be argued as unnecessary inspections, unnecessary redundancies, increasing the delays and compliance costs. You might notice that that last step in that entire process involved cargo being transported from trucks operated by Mexican trucks onto trucks operated by U.S. drivers. That is because for the past few decades, Mexican trucks have been banned from operating within the United States. In 1980, the Motor Carrier Act partially limited regulatory barriers to entry. It significantly reduced these barriers and allowed for the free movement of trucks crossing national borders at both the U.S.-Mexico border and the U.S.-Canada border. However, that free movement of trucks was short-lived because in 1982, U.S. trucks were banned from Mexico. The U.S. quickly retaliated that same year and enacted a ban of its own, banning all Mexican-operated trucks from operating in the U.S. A provision in NAFTA, when it was signed, it explicitly stated that this ban was to be removed within a few years. However, the ban remained in place for more than 2 decades due to the fact that the United States Congress citing environmental and safety concerns. Now, Mexican stakeholders we spoke to on the other side of the border raised the issue, their belief that unions were the main driver of this continuing ban, stating that unions felt threatened if allowing Mexican truck drivers to enter and operate in the United States. That would threaten the lower labor costs would result in steep competition to current drivers in the U.S. drivers. Under the George W. Bush administration, there were attempts to more fully comply with NAFTA, which with mixed success. Although in 2007, a new pilot program was initiated, allowing for trucks that were able to pass the inspection process to enter and operate in the United States. However, the program suffered from a low amount of participation. Only about a quarter of trucks that were believed to be compliant were able to participate in the program. Although, as a result of the pilot program, it did find that there were very low levels of any safety violations, possibly allowing to curb the argument about safety being the reason for keeping this ban in place. In 2015, the U.S. signaled an interest in lifting this ban on Mexican trucks operating in the United States. But stakeholders that we spoke to in Mexico and a private stakeholder we spoke to in the United States both mentioned deep skepticism as to whether Mexican trucks would ever be allowed to fully operate within the United States, just due to the historical precedence of the ban being taken. So once a truck enters the United States, it still has a long journey ahead of it, many barriers to overcome. Let's talk about this next leg of the journey will be ISIS.
Thanks, Brian. Okay. So I'll be taking the wheel now. We've arrived on the other side of the border, and our truck is moving on a federally regulated highway. And for our case study, we use the I-35 corridor since it does go through Texas. Now, a federally regulated highway, but state regulations still take effect depending on the state that I-35 runs through. So originally, states oversaw all regulations within their jurisdiction. Prior to 1956, the regulations were created by individual states according to the needs of each state. And in 1956, the Federal Aid Highway Act, or FHA, established the first federal truck size and weight limits. Now, there have been many iterations of this legislation, the most recent of which is the FAST Act in 2015. There are federal limits for the entire interstate highway system for the United States, and that consists of around 209,000 roads, which includes main highways and secondary and primary feeder routes. Now, when the restrictions took effect, it included provisions for states whose size and weight limits were higher than those of the newly enacted regulations, and this is what we call a grandfather clause. And so there were some states grandfathered in, which resulted in a disparity. So as we can see, Texas, Kansas, and Iowa and Minnesota all have 80,000 pounds for their highest max weight, while Oklahoma and Missouri are at different, so 90,000 or 92,000 pounds. And this is just looking at the states on the I-35 corridor. So now let's say our truck is in Oklahoma on I-35 wanting to move into Texas. If it's following the max weight of Oklahoma, it will have to get a permit for its overweight to get into Texas. Now this means that most trucks usually comply with the most stringent standards, so 80,000 pounds in this case, to ensure that they won't have to pay fines or get multiple permits. And size and weight have more effect than height and clearance regulations, since those are standards utilized by truck manufacturers, and weight fluctuates depending on the good, and for our purposes right now we're just talking about general goods. Now the rationale behind oversized and overweight limits is that the highways that trucks travel on experience wear and tear, and so these kind of act as a tax to ensure that roads can be repaired. And I've now talked about most of this on the slide. Gross weight violations do slide on a scale, so for our example, Texas has fines that go from, if you're 1 to 2,500 pounds overweight at the smallest end of the scale, you pay $100 to $500, and that's just for 1 pound over scale. Now, if you're more than 40,000 pounds overweight, you can pay $7,000 to $10,000 in fines. So we did talk to some state officials for Department of Transportation in other states and asking why the standards haven't been harmonized. And they talked about how it was skeptical to harmonize because states are very attached to their weight standards, height standards, etc., that differ potentially from the federal limits. The American Association of State Highway Officials did a harmonization study, and it pointed out challenges of changing even minor arbitrary regulations due to state statutes, and these could be warning signs, oversized, overweight regulations, height, length, etc. Now, those aren't the only regulations that a truck experiences. There are obscure state regulations, one of which is the mud flap regulation, or mud guard. For an example, Illinois had a curved mud guard rule, and so every time a truck would have to drive into Illinois, they'd have to pull over and put a curved mud guard on, which is different than the standard straight mud guard, which 45 other states were using. The United States Supreme Court said this was unconstitutional in the 70s, and so that has been overturned, but that's just an example of an obscure state regulation. There are burdensome tanker inspections. So for our study, we looked at Texas, and Texas has 3 inspectors for the entire state, and you have to get inspected before you can transport liquid or gas in a tanker in the state. So let's say we have a truck coming from Ohio trying to get liquid nitrogen into the state of Texas. It would first have to come with an empty tanker into the state of Texas, get inspected by one of 3 inspectors for the entire state, drive all the way back to Ohio with an empty tanker, then fill up with its goods, and then make its route. So this is very costly, very inefficient time-wise, and it's not just one inspection for every truck in the fleet. Every truck needs to be inspected. So if you have 10 trucks in your fleet, you have to do this for each truck. So this is very costly, and it could potentially push mom and pop companies out of the market if they can't afford to do this or don't have the time. So not only do regulations exist for the trucks themselves, but the drivers also have regulations and standards. So the hours of service restrictions were implemented to ensure safety and to mitigate risk. And so we have an 11-hour driving limit on drivers, which encompasses in their 14-hour driving window. And that's a 60 to 70 to 70-hour duty limit. Now let's say our truck is on I-35, it gets stuck in traffic, as we all do on I-35, and it takes 5 hours to move in traffic. That eats into their 11-hour driving limit and eats into their time that they can deliver their good. And so this is just another hurdle for truck drivers and the industry. The driver shortage is an even bigger hurdles. So the American Trucking Association said in 2015 that there was a shortage of approximately 48,000 drivers, and they're projecting this to rise to 175,000 drivers by 2024, which is a huge amount of shortage. And this is just a simple economics point. If we have low supply, high demand, it's going to be very costly to move goods. And not only that, but the median age of truck drivers in the U.S. is 49, which is about 7 years older than the median age of a worker in the U.S. at 42. Now, to drive this point home, I'll pass it on to my colleague.
10 more S's. So I'm going to steer this presentation in a little bit different direction now. Now that this sort of hypothetical truck has arrived at the border, we really want to discuss how the process looks different at the Canada border in comparison to that which Ryan described at the Mexico border. And so we've talked about the trucks coming in from Mexico, but what about the people driving the trucks, the drivers, right? So as a preliminary matter, it's really important to think about the process by which people are coming in and out of the United States from Canada and Mexico, presumably. So Canadian drivers, we found, can move relatively freely into the United States. They really need only to be able to provide some type of valid passport, an enhanced driver's license, or alternatively a type of trusted traveler card. But on the other end of the spectrum, Mexican drivers are required to obtain what are known as B1 or business visitor visas. And suffice it to say that obtaining a B1 visa is really not very easy. So it's also important to remember that U.S. immigration policy is actually premised on disfavoring non-U.S. labor. So when we're looking at, everybody just wave your arms really quickly. When we're looking at, I'm trying to keep everyone awake.
So 7 innings stretch.
Okay. So when we're looking at what's driving this policy, and especially the differences between the Mexico border and the Canada border, the odds are sort of stacked against Mexican drivers. Because the B1 visa is a business visitor visa, it's requiring that these Mexican drivers can only engage in business that's a necessary incident of commerce. So this looks like them only being able to, for instance, load or unload the cargo that's on their truck. This segues actually relatively easily into a discussion of cabotage, which was a fun word for our group because, you know, at first everybody thinks cabbage. How does that have anything to do with immigration? So cabotage is really what's known as, it's the practice of point-to-point hauling of property within one country by a transporter from another country. And so both Canadian and Mexican drivers, as you can see, are prohibited from engaging in cabotage. So this really means that they can't be taking goods into the United States, picking up from one U.S. location, and then delivering those goods to another U.S. location. Why? Because this is effectively labor. And remember that we do not like other people coming into our country and engaging in labor that supposedly takes away from the United States drivers, though we have a driver shortage. So this does impact Canadian and Mexican drivers differently, though. The reason being because if Mexican drivers engage in cabotage, that's effectively labor. And remember that labor is a violation of their B1 business visitor visa. This could cause Mexican drivers to face some potentially harsh penalties, even subjecting them to possible exclusion from the U.S. in the future. So the consequences are pretty steep. Also, the inspection process. The one that we heard about at the Mexico border is pretty substantially less involved when we're looking at the Canada border. This is partly due to safety concerns, especially in our post-9/11 society. We really found this sentiment among Mexican stakeholders that they were distrusted, and this certainly shows in the inspection process. Additionally, the process is quite a bit more alleviated at the Canada border from what we could tell, because Canadians are able to come into the United States relatively freely with their trucks. So the process that Ryan described, whereby goods are having to be switched onto an alternate vehicle, is not happening so substantially at the Canada border. The trucks are able to operate in the U.S., and the goods do not have to change vehicles. And then, of course, another major barrier that this truck will face both at the Mexico border and the Canada border is wait times. From what we can tell, wait times are quite a bit longer at the Mexican border, but that's not to downplay what seems to be a substantial disparity in border infrastructure in the United States. So, though the wait times are more significant at the Mexico border, they are still experiencing that at the Canada border, and Mexican and Canadian drivers will see that to some extent or another. So, thinking about our group's overall recommendations, which has been very difficult to develop, how might this trip have really looked differently had there been more of a harmonization of regulations, or rather a lack of some regulation? The research that we've engaged in suggests that an overall streamlining of the process, of course, harmonization of some of the different regulations would save time, obviously alleviate costs, and even potentially have some positive environmental impacts. So, one thing that we've heard discussed is sort of one agency at the state or federal level that is streamlining the permitting process. There are many hoops that are having to be jumped through, and that's adding time and cost to it. Another potential recommendation is removing some of this redundant inspection and documentation process encountered at international borders. In addition to what might be an overall streamlining of the process, really better data collection might inform regulators as to what stakeholders want out of this process. So another thing that we've talked about quite a bit is harmonization, but what does that really look like and how can it be affected is sort of big question marks surrounding our report. So there have been, as Ryan described briefly, some attempts at harmonization, but they've been pretty largely unsuccessful, and this is due to what is by very nature this politicized, highly politicized process, and there are certain disparities that we seem to think actually are benefiting particular states, which is a main driver in what's prohibiting them from working collaboratively on this. So one potential solution, and what might be the best, is just gathering state officials together for sort of roundtable discussions with stakeholders so they can see what goes into the planning process and what changes in the planning process need to be made. And to clarify, part of the reason why we think the harmonization attempts in the past have failed is because, like I mentioned, some stakeholders are particularly opposed to this. So groups like the Western Governors Association that Ryan spoke about, they've pretty much stated they think harmonization would be infeasible because it would be nearly impossible to get these states to work together and collaborate. Another issue that we've identified, and I don't know if you would call this a recommendation or a barrier or both, is the lack of full enforcement of NAFTA. So the absence of full enforcement obviously is creating issues at the border that we've seen. But a complete opening of the border might have some winners and losers, as it were, because what has become this sort of very multi-layered border crossing process has generated a new industry of people that are then able to capitalize on that multi-layered process. So, for instance, border cities like Laredo, they have carrier facilities set up where they're taking advantage of the barriers that are encountered crossing over the border. If there were full enforcement of NAFTA and the border were to be open, the concern for at least stakeholders in Laredo might be that it would become a mere pass-through town. How do you get those people to buy in is the big question. So really, in conclusion, obviously in our extremely consumer-driven economy where we demand the just-in-time delivery of goods, trucking is pivotal. It's a dynamic industry, though. The problem is that it's very multifaceted, and there are a lot of players in the game. So you've got the trucking industry, freight stakeholders, state and local governments, regulatory bodies, and this doesn't even mention labor unions, third-party businesses, and even technology companies that are helping to assist in this process. So really, every step is highly regulated with different winners and losers, as it were. Really, we think that regulators should be seeking the perspectives of all the stakeholders in their decision-making process, and this seems to be the clearest path, if you can even call it that, to more of a streamlined and harmonized process that would ultimately, hopefully, eliminate barriers so that the U.S. economy can enjoy greater productivity and then ultimately international trade competitiveness. So one thing that we would course, including our very own President Michael Young. At this time, we are actually going to. Oh, we're doing a question right now. That's right. That's what the question said. I don't know if the rest of the harmonizing group wants to join us so that we can all field questions.
Sure.
And, I think we sort of recognize that some of this information is probably already well known to you, but for the sake of making the presentation cohesive, we wanted to give a good narrative and such. So, any questions that you have, we're happy to attempt to answer them.
So I don't really have any questions. What I want to say to you guys is that when I first talked with the dean about this opportunity, I was excited about it, but I was picturing myself in law school, and I wasn't maybe quite as a committed student as you guys are. I don't know. And I thought, this will be great. Let's see what these guys can come up with. Okay, that's kind of my attitude. This is going to be great. If it's fantastic, it's fantastic. If it's not, it was a good effort. It was a good learning process for everybody, and no harm to NASCO. Only good stuff can come. We were kind of in a no-lose situation.
Right.
And as I've been working with you guys and meeting you and then seeing this final product, I will tell you that I think most of you probably had not had much experience in the trucking industry or even really cared about it as much. I did not care about this stuff at all. I never thought 1 second about how this awesome thermos could ever get to a shelf or into my hands. It never dawned on me to care.
Turns out it's a lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
Until I got into the transportation industry. And so then I started learning about all this stuff and how highly political it is, how highly critical it is, how important it is, how there's so many layers to the onion that you have to peel. And so as NASCO has really formed out of trying to get regulators and stakeholders and governments and federal governments and state governments and local governments and industry to talk to one another. That was our purpose. But so I'll tell you that sitting here listening to this, for you guys not knowing really anything about what you're talking about, you hit all the major points. You hit all the major challenges that are a part of the problem. I'm completely blown away by how you were able in a short amount of time. I mean, it takes people a lifetime to understand how this works and the complexities, and you guys have really talked to the right people and got the right information, and you hit all the major, like your statistics and your entities and the studies that were performed are ones that have been sort of critical in the process of developing any kind of dialogue on this subject matter. So, I mean, I'm really, truly not just saying this because you're in front of your teachers and your dean or whatever, but I mean, I really think you guys did an amazing job. And I don't have so many questions because I do sort of know some of this,
Yeah.
but the whole point here is that we weren't asking you to do this for NASCO. We know what the problems are. What we're asking you to do it for is so that we can spread this out to a lot of people around the country and internationally even, because not everyone does understand the problem or the challenges. And I think it gives a fresh perspective for you guys to have honed in on the same challenges. But you guys are students that are just starting out in your careers. So I think it weighs more. It's not like people that have been around for a long time like I have that have been talking to people saying, you've got to get your acts together, we've got to do this. This is like, these are people that knew nothing about this industry, and they came to the same challenge, critical problem areas, which is, it's the politics of the matter, it's the elected officials, it's the regulators not talking to the industry, and that's what NASCO is trying to do, is convene venues. So I think it's a really, really good presentation. You hit all the major points. There's a lot more to it than just what you've hit, but that's the stuff that you couldn't possibly, you hit all the major points. There's a lot of subsets under each one of them that you wouldn't even have time. No one does. That's the issue.
Right.
So I think, seriously, it's an A+ job. I'm really blown away. We actually had a conference call. I think some of you know this, or maybe all of you do. A meeting/conference call with several of the state DOT officials a couple of months ago, I think now. I travel a lot at this time, a month ago. And we were having the same issues with them. I mean, it's like, look, everyone knows what needs to be done. The problem is it takes funding. Like, in order to get anyone to agree on raising the weights on their interstates, they have to have the money to support their bridges. Well, obviously, but there's no money to support the bridges, so they're saying, great, we'd love this idea, but give me the money to fix all my bridges, and there's no money to do that. So it's all so circular and going back to how our government spends money at the federal level, at the state level, major freight corridors, and states that say, well, this isn't just Oklahoma's problem or Texas's problem, because this is a major international corridor, so the federal government should come in and pay for it. Like, there's all this stuff that goes on, and it's amazing, but you've hit on all the points, and so
And at the end of the
fantastic
meeting,
job.
we left and they all said, there's lots of problems and challenges.
Yeah, I mean, it was
We
like.
don't know what to do.
Every time you pull something apart, so we're going back to them, and so and their answer is, well, this is really hard, and so my answer to them was, well, that's not a reason to not do anything, like, it's hard, so we need to start, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, so let's figure out one thing we can do. So we're gonna pick away at this and try to get them to at least be held accountable for, is there not one thing you guys can do together? But it just takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, but I think you did an amazing job, and we can definitely use this. And I don't actually know, so you have the presentation, but are you guys putting together then like a
Oh,
report?
Yes.
Okay.
We have a good
Yeah.
80-page report coming
Okay.
anyways.
Wow.
That'll be much
Well,
more substantive.
so for example, I mean, we will take the report and we'll read it, and I don't know that us giving 80 pages to anybody is gonna be that helpful, but what I think we might wanna do is maybe take some excerpts that, you know, the most critical parts for our benefit, and be able to give that to members of Congress. We're going up there in May to Washington DC. We already were in Ottawa, but we have great follow-up capabilities in all these places, and we're going to Mexico City in July. But to be able to take this work and hand it to members of Congress or their staff, take the excerpts to say, this is what your job is as federal government's one of them, but this is a big one. I think we can definitely do that. I think we have we'll definitely forward your report to all of our members for them to read through or sift through at their leisure. Some of them are very well educated on this stuff,